A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who have joined us for this 21st session of the World University Summit 2023, organized by OP Jindal Global University. I am Dr. Mercy Deborah, a professor at Jindal Global Law School and a moderator for this session. We have so far had a series of enriching sessions at this summit on a range of compelling issues, which go into the making of universities of the future. And so I welcome you all to another session that hopes to be interesting on the theme Amorphous Spaces and Uncertain Times, School to Work Transition and Employability in the 21st Century. The theme of this session resonates with a lot of us as educators and as stakeholders in our universities, as we often witness our students and youth experience difficulties as they transition from school to the workforce. Some of the things that I'd like to, in my initial remarks, underscore include that the first and foremost challenge that most students face is, of course, making the cut for a job. And while this is often a product of their own perseverance in acquiring the required skills and training to crack a job interview, however, this first step can be daunting for many who lack the guidance and training, and most importantly, the access to resources to be able to reach out to headhunters and secure campus placements. The second challenge that besets this area of transition from school to work is finding your fit in the job market, which is never an easy task, and with opportunities few and far between in various sectors of the economy, students often grapple with tough choices as to whether to take up jobs that might not be the best fit for them, or run the risk of biding their time waiting for a job that is proximate to their training and aptitude. And the third challenge is that besets our students is adapting to the job, where students have to learn and unlearn their skills that they may have acquired even in the course of their traditional education. And many times they are required to upskill and reskill themselves to adapt to the changing requirements of the job. And the fourth and the last most important challenge, according to me, is preparing our students for the unknown variables in the job market. And this requires a careful consideration as to whether we, as building universities of the future, have a mindset which is inculcated in our students of thinking ahead of the curve and imparting such skills that are transferable and translational in nature, giving our youth, who are architects and stakeholders in the future of nature building, an ability to develop interoperable skills to transition from school to the job market. Here in India, the government of India has launched a series of programs over the past decade, such as Skill India, Startup India, Made in India, to bolster the possibilities of creating more avenues for employment, given that India has one of the world's largest demographic dividend, particularly amongst the age group of 18 to 45 years. While this may be the India story, job creation and employability of youth remains a challenge for governments and higher education institutions worldwide. And so with those introductory remarks, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists for this session. Joining us for this panel to address some of these issues that are is an erudite and extremely experienced panel of university administrators and academicians. To begin with, we have the Vice Chancellor of the SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Chennai, Professor Dr. C. Muthamizhchelvan, who is a professor of nanoscience and nanotechnology and a well-accomplished scholar with about more than 180 research publications, and holds about more than 30 years of experience both as a university administrator and academician. In his role as Vice Chancellor of the SRM University, Chennai, Professor Muthamizhchelvan has been spearheading industry academia initiatives in various engineering specializations and has been instrumental, in fact, in his institute of creating innovation and incubation centers and fab labs, which provide students with a platform to transform their ideas into products and various prototype models. We also have with us Professor Agar, who's the director of the Graduate and International Programs at Peking University, Shenzhen Graduate School in China. Professor Agar completed his PhD from the University of Wisconsin law school and has, of course, worked at one of the top law firms in Egypt in the area of international dispute resolution and commercial law, and has also taught as an adjunct professor of law at the American University in Cairo. My colleague, Professor Kalyani Unkule, is an associate professor and a visiting very accomplished academician and a visiting professor at various leading universities across the world. Interestingly, she's also founded the Wide War Initiative to encourage stronger higher education ties between India and Europe, which was as a continuum to her scholarship as an Erasmus Mundus scholar about a decade ago. And through this Wide Board initiative, she had sought to support the European Commission and create an Erasmus Mundus community whereby people could ideate on various and collaborate on various spheres of education. Lastly, we have Professor Shaun, who will join us, but we will nonetheless continue our session. And to commence this session, I would now request, Professor Muthamizhchelvan, and then invite my esteemed panelists to share their initial reflections on the theme which is set for this session. Over to you, Professor Muthamizhchelvan.
Yeah, thank you, Mercy. Happy to be here. And good morning to all the participants. As has been highlighted by Mercy, there is a huge difference between a student in the school and then when he moves over to the industry or the workforce. It is normally said as when a student is in the school, he or she has to simply follow the instructions. Or in simple terms, it's like a conveyor belt. You do whatever they say, then you get to cross the bridge. But in the case of industry, according to Hilbert's law, the biggest problem at work is that no one tells you what to do. Or in simple terms, you are reactive in the school and proactive in the industry. Changing somebody from reactive to proactive is a big challenge. And that challenge has to be taken care by the academia, the schools or the higher education institutions. To my mind, there are 7 core dimensions which is very important to talk about or think about for a transition from school to workforce. The first and foremost is the career exploration. Before somebody joins the program, it is absolutely necessary for them to explore themselves, the different career options, and to determine what they want to do. But what happens here is they take up some program and after that they explore different careers. I think this should be the first thing before they embark into some program. Now, this could involve taking career assessment tests. There are a lot of online assessment tests available. So we can try, the students can try that and then see whether they'll be fit into that. Talking to professionals in different fields, that's another way of narrowing your career options. And then researching job opportunities. I think this is the first step, or this is one of the core dimensions when a student wants to move over to the workforce. The second one, obviously, is the education training. Now, in education training, it is generally felt that the institutions are there for the award of degree or certificates, or completing certain apprenticeship, or gaining work experience, or going through internship or co-op programs, something like that. Now, if we can, as an institution, if we can bring certain skills that are required into the curriculum, the transition will be easy. Then, while the student is in the institution, the next core dimension is they have to look for the available job opportunities. Or is there a work integrated learning program or opportunity in the company? Now, gone are the days where we can survey at the work just by having the knowledge of what we have learned in the institution. So, work integrated learning program is one thing that the students should look for. Then the fourth one is about the skills. Now, skills, it is very frequently talked about. The first and foremost thing is the communication skills. Gone are the days where the students happen to work in a place closer to their locality. They happen to move out of the state, out of the country, and therefore communication skills is one of the essential things that is very, very important. During my college days, I have not heard of the term critical thinking and problem solving. Probably they're all built into the normal course of life. But today, a lot of importance has to be given to critical thinking and problem solving, which require the ability to analyze data, evaluate options, and make informed decisions. That's the second thing. Digital literacy, we cannot say I belong to an arts group, so I need not have any digital literacy. Teamwork and collaboration is very, very important. Unless this skill is with the student, it will be very difficult to cope up in the industry environment. Adaptability and flexibility. Leadership skills is again another important thing. It is not that one should wait for 15 years, 20 years to become a leader. So the employers want workers who can lead and inspire others. That's very, very important. And the last one is about the cultural competency or diversity. So these 7 core dimensions are very, very important when you think of a transition from school to the workforce. So with this introduction, let me stop here and then I'll come back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Muthamizhchelvan. You've really underscored some of the important aspects related to the transition from school to work, particularly how important it is for students to undertake career assessments and as well as to tweak our curriculums and make them more oriented towards the job market requirements and the changing requirements of the job market in terms of digital literacy and other technological developments. I would now just steer the discussion to, and I'll invite another panelist, Dr. Agar from the Peking University, to weigh in on and give some initial reflections on this theme.
Thank you, Professor Deborah. And maybe I'll just start out by saying thank you to Jindal Global University for inviting me to be part of this really interesting and important event. And of course, in addition to thank you to all of our other panelists and our kind moderator, Professor Deborah, thank you to all the various participants who might be watching as well. For me personally, and kind of as a representative of Peking University's School of Transnational Law today, this topic in particular, I think, is really important. In many ways, Peking University started its School of Transnational Law, where I do most of my work, specifically to help bridge this gap between what it means to be a student and the workforce. Of course, it's kind of a dilemma that you've heard about for generations, that much of what you do in school does not always prepare you for the realities of going out and maybe getting your first job. And so when the school was created, it specifically was targeting this as one of the problems it was trying to solve. So from the beginning, the coursework at the university focused on a lot of kind of practical professional skills over maybe more doctrinal areas of law. So, of course, there are still all those core topics that you'd find at any other law school, and this would be analogous to other types of programs outside of law. But in addition to something like contracts, you would also find a class on contract negotiation. In addition to maybe a class on, tort law, you'd also find a class on, settlement and mediation. And so part of this, a big part of this was specifically to try to have graduates of the program that would have as seamless of a transition into the workforce as possible. And so maybe, I won't go into too much more detail there, other than to say, for us, it's always a very heartening, it's a very pleasing story to hear from our alumni when we get contacted by students saying something like the example I'm about to give you, which is, I had a recent student from Australia, who had done our Master of Law program. And he contacted me to say that he was assigned, to a task, to a case at his first role at his law firm. And he wrote me to say, it was great because it was this internet regulation case. And it was exactly something that I had in one of my classes at the School of Transnational Law. And he said, out of everyone at my law firm, I was the only one who knew this sort of like technical area of law that we needed to solve this very kind of current contemporary issue. And it's those sorts of stories that help us know that we're doing something right in preparing our graduates for the workforce. But obviously, this is a much larger discussion as well that I'm happy to be a part of as the panel progresses, but I will leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Professor Agar, for sharing your experiences at Peking University. And part of organizing such summits is also to have a cross-pollination of ideas and see what each of us are doing in different countries and time zones and jurisdictions. Now, I'd like to invite my colleague, Professor Kalyani, to weigh in and share our thoughts on the theme of this session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. And Mercy, when I read the title of this, or the theme of this panel, I was wondering, does the transition from school to work happen just once in life? Right? I mean, because on one hand, we keep talking about lifelong learning, but on the other hand, we keep talking about we define, or we think of this transition as like a one-time occurrence right after graduation. And so I thought that the most honest way in which I could reflect on this issue is through my position as a mid-career, working person now. And then I thought, as a mid-career professional, what are some of the questions that I wish my education would have better empowered me to be able to find the answers to? And so I just wrote those questions down, and maybe we can pick up some of them in the discussion to come. So these are my questions. Okay. When I feel I've hit the peak of this one thing that I've been doing, what's next? What comes next? When I feel like either I've hit the peak or I don't feel as rewarded or gratified doing what I'm doing what I have been doing, right? What is the balance between paying my dues and asking for my worth? Okay. I do feel that I do sense this dynamic between where I am these days and where many students are, which is that when maybe I was in their place, I was all about paying my dues, but they are so much already about asking for their worth. And especially at like a mid-career point, like this can really become something of a consideration. Let's just put it that way. Then as my personal situation and goals evolve, how do I navigate the impact that this will have on my work? And I know many people think of this just in terms of having children, but I think that this could happen. Your personal situation and goals could evolve in any number of ways, right? And I think that there's a risk of like oversimplifying that into like having family responsibilities. So that's not all that I mean by this. How do I know which qualities, abilities, and you mentioned this in your opening remarks, Mercy, how do I know which qualities, abilities, and interests I possess are the ones that lend themselves to a broad range of prospects to earn a living? How do I make sense of the need to move from being this one kind of professional? This is very important, right? Like, because we come to be perceived in the outside world primarily in terms of what we do. And then we start forming our self-image around that as well. How do I make sense of the need to move from being this one kind of professional, which people have come to know me as being, know me for, or know me as, to being something else? And how do I find the right language and confidence to articulate this choice? That this choice I've made to be someone else, right? Or to do something else. What is even the language for that, right? And I mean, do we have access? If I'm going to, on the other hand, if I'm going to remain in the same job or work, what steps do I need to take to ensure that I stay motivated and keep growing? And then final question I wrote down is, how do I find or build a community of mutual support around these issues? Because that is so important, right? Community of support, both in terms of like the mental and psychological challenges surrounding all of this, but also to really be able to see where your opportunities could be coming from. And so I feel that, often coming back to this one-time transition model that we have in our mind, around which we tend to have this discussion, I feel that this individualized winner-takes-all mindset that we often unintentionally promote in the prevailing employability paradigm, that you have to distinguish yourself as this XYZ kind of top of the pile, top of the heap, checking every single box and more kind of paradigm that this has become. I think it overlooks these vital down the line considerations. And I do think that there can be a trade-off, and there often is a trade-off between preparing somebody for that first job, or somebody investing 3 years or 5 years or 4 years exclusively focused on that first job, and somebody spending those 4 or 5 years knowing that this is going to be a continuing hustle, right? This is going to be lifelong hustle. I think that directing students increasingly in that direction of that first job. I just wanted to kind of set out here what is the trade-off. And so I thought that I would just kind of focus on that today.
Thank you so much, Kalyani, Professor Kalyani. Those are some of the very valid points that you have put it across and shared it for our consideration in this session, because a lot of times, both the training that we impart at schools as well as at universities seems to, ensure that the student is well prepared to make the cut in the job market, without also, mentally preparing them that this is a marathon race in the job market, and and that you are not just, we're not preparing you just to make the cut, but you have to understand that even as professionals, you are students for life. And it's a continuous ongoing process where we at some juncture hit dead ends, and then we reinvent ourselves and to see in what innovative ways can we continue to re-engage ourselves and also buoy our spirits and our interest in creating and innovating things, not just for ourselves, but for those around us and for the community, larger community around us. So those are some very interesting questions, and perhaps we would definitely like to revisit in the next 30 minutes of the conversation, the question, and just the conversation that we want to have in the next 30 minutes. And I'll definitely, we will take up a couple of those questions. But before we, roll this conversation, I just wanted to, I have a question for Professor Muthamizhchelvan, because he's a Vice Chancellor of SRM University, and he's quite an experienced administrator and academician for more than 30 years. And because you represent, a premier institute, particularly in the sciences in India, I just wanted to ask you, sir, that in the context of, assisting and preparing our students to transition from school to, the workforce, particularly as, as a leader of such a premier institute, and particularly in STEM disciplines, how are you repositioning your students in a technology-driven market, and how are you leveraging technology such as AI, robotics, and along with your hardcore sciences? How are you preparing your students, and how has the experience been for you at not just your university, but in general, your observations of how universities need to gear up and are preparing themselves, especially students in these STEM disciplines?
Okay. Yeah. Now, in my earlier round, I was mentioning only the 4 core dimensions, and Professor Kalyani has covered the remaining 3. The remaining 3 are professional networking, new job roles, and then the community support that she was mentioning. So these 7 are very core. Now, coming to your question, yeah, we did face a lot of challenges in recruiting, in making our students employable. The common buzzword today is, the industry personnel says that the present day students are not job ready. About 10 years ago, we created what's called as a career development center, where we happen to train our students. That happens to be a credit course also. So that gave an edge over the students from other institutions. That's the first step that we took. The second one is, we offered what is called as the one credit course, which is delivered by the industry experts. Now, for these programs or the courses, we were not looking at bigger numbers, and these courses will be offered only in niche area. The students are interested, they can attend that course, and the credit transfer will happen. So in that way, we created opportunity for our students to get connected to the industry do internship or project work. Then the third one is we thought that our faculty should be skilled enough to bridge the gap between the academia and the industry. So we introduced what is called as the faculty industry immersion program, where every faculty has to go to industry, stay there for 2 to 3 weeks, understand what's happening there, come back, and then translate those things in the classroom or bring in some change in the curriculum. Then the next initiative that we did was encourage the students to be an entrepreneur, become an employer rather than being an employee. So these things have brought in a lot of change in SRM Institute of Science and Technology. And our students are better trained when compared to many other institutions. We also did not stop with that. Since 2014, our faculty members were asked to do one online course per semester, which is beyond their specialization. So this has helped a lot of faculty to understand what is happening outside the university, outside the country, and then bring in all those exposure into the classrooms. So in this way, we have been trying to bring in some change and train our students to be ready for the workforce.
All right. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing some of your perspectives on how your university is gearing up to bridge this gap between and, sort of make it more smoothen the transition between the school as well as the workforce. And in fact, interestingly, a couple of years ago, for our viewers who are tuning in for this session, your university had a distinction of sending a nano satellite, which speaks volumes about the kind of innovation and incubation that you are undertaking at your university. And I'd like to have a question for Professor Agar. Dr. Agar, it's a very interesting, over the past decade, we've been seeing some very unique trends where our youngsters, have been asserting, have been extremely self-reliant and resilient, and boldly opting out of lucrative campus placement jobs to sort of carve out their own destiny by creating startups which have gone on to become unicorns and taking a lot of self-regulating professional pursuits, such as even becoming content, creators or YouTubers. So it gives a sense that, no more do the traditional degrees that are otherwise imparted at our universities are increasingly becoming outmoded to meet the demands and the requirements of the job market. Do you think going forward, in your perception, based on the trends that you're seeing in China, and then you've also worked in Egypt, do you think that youngsters are now increasingly opting out of the traditional mode of work, where they are conscripted to be an employee, and instead preferring a style of work that gives them greater flexibility to upscale their own work at their own pace?
It's an interesting and fun question. And I should say, I mean, I will by no means claim to be an expert or speak for all of what's going on in an entire massive market like China or an entire country like Egypt. In many ways, I actually feel like I'm seeing more of that trend in the United States, which is where I am from originally. It's, you know, where I did my legal studies. I think China is, at least I should say, you know, based on the sliver of China that I see, based on, you know, sort of the students I work with, the you know, the employers that we see out there, I think it is still a very degree and credential focused job market. I also think, you know, I mean, my perspective might be skewed compared to, let's say, the technology world, because especially in law, when you're starting out, it's quite difficult in a big market to, you know, hang up your sign with your name on it and start right out as a private practice attorney, for example. So nearly all of our lawyers, you know, graduating out of our program are looking to go into top law firms. You know, they're or, you know, working as legal advisors to the big companies in China or elsewhere around the world. Maybe there are less, you know, again, compared to something like the technology world, there are less massive, radical new ideas out there to create a business around when you come from a legal background than maybe coming from something like stem cell research or robotics. But yeah, I mean, I'd say I see less of it in China, maybe a bit more of it with some students I've worked with in Egypt, you know, students who have gone out and maybe found trouble in the more conventional job market. And so they've decided, all right, I'm going to take a risk and maybe start my own law firm. Obviously, that's a bigger challenge. You need a lot of funding going into it. And then I probably see more, again, still of that with, you know, graduates and colleagues I have back in the US.
All right. That's an interesting perspective. Before I have some questions for Professor Kalyani, just as a follow-up to this question that I've put to Professor Agar. Professor Muthamizhchelvan, I have a specific question which also ties up with my question to Professor Agar, is as a head of an institution, as a vice chancellor of a university, do you think there have been any changes in the approach and perspective of students towards employability, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay. Certainly, there's a lot of change in the mindset of the students. Now, everybody feels that it is not necessary to come to the campus and learn. I would like to share one interesting conversation between me and a student, which happened about 5 years ago. A student walked into my office and said, "Sir, I wanted to share something with you." I said, "Please go ahead." And you know, in all Indian universities, this attendance is mandatory, minimum 75%, 80%. He said, "Why is this attendance mandatory for us to sit in the end semester examination?" I had no answer. But again, I asked him, "What made you to ask this question?" He said, "Whatever is available in the book, the teacher is teaching the same thing. There is nothing new for me to learn. I can as well sit in my room or house, wherever, and learn all these things." So this was raised about 5 years ago. And today, more and more number of students want to be away from the campus. Since information is available everywhere, they are mature enough to choose and study whatever they want. So in that sense, we have been permitting students to take more number of online courses, which is given through various platforms. I also personally feel that their interest is not to stay in one company. Initially, they may be there for about 2 years, 3 years. Then after that, they branch off to maybe for higher education or learn new skills and then move on to the other things. Now, this type of skilling happens because of the large number of clubs that are student clubs that are available in the campus. So I think the students will get an opportunity if more number of student clubs are in the campus, and that's how I feel that the students are more empowered here.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. I quite concur with you in terms of the experience that most of us as educators have been, observing in terms of, the students don't anymore look up to the classroom space as the only place where, they can gather knowledge. But COVID-19 has sort of broadened their perspective in terms of the modes in which they can access, and enjoy the kind of flexibilities to do other things beside their primary studies. I just had a couple of questions to Professor Kalyani, and I just wanted to come back to some of the interesting questions that you had alluded to in your initial remarks. And I'd like you to take the liberty to address some of these questions, particularly nobody really talks about in our educational institutions, and very few do, because, we're not really geared to, inform our students constantly. It's a mad race where everybody has to touch the finish line as early as possible. So, how do you really psychologically, mentally prepare our students to understand that, it's not just getting the first job, as you mentioned in your initial remarks, but how do we really prepare them mentally and psychologically to be able to take on a marathon race in their career, and to also, sort of apprise them that there could be downsides, dead ends in a career, and you really need to regroup yourself and, get back. And it's okay sometimes to occasionally have, reach those dead ends. But one needs to rework and assess. How is it that we can broadly, could you weigh in, and that we can prepare our students, in terms of understanding what really employability also entails?
Mercy, I'm so glad that our discussion today has been all about our institutional practices and taking a step back and reflecting on our institutional practices, because there are so many practices and the way in which we have these discussions, which is so misleading, right? Or which gives mixed signals at any rate. Now, for example, the discussion we were just having between job and startup. Tell me today which job is not entrepreneurial, which job is not a consistent hustle. As academics, we have to raise money for every single thing we do. You have to raise money to get out of the house these days, literally. Okay, you have to raise money and put together the right team before you even think about, okay, what are we going to work, right? First is the money there, and are the people there with the right people there with time in their hands? Okay, tell me if this is not entrepreneurship, right? Even government and public sector jobs today are about entrepreneurship, because you have to project the right image of your ministry, of your department. Is this not entrepreneurship, right? Is this not sales and marketing, right? So first of all, this misleading assumption that if you are the entrepreneurial type, you will be self-employed, and if you are kind of the conservative type, you can just go get stuck in some job, right? So when we have this type of discussion, this is the first misleading signal that we send. I love the point that Vice Chancellor made about students wanting to spend time off campus, right? If students are wanting to spend time off campus, why are we trying to bring as many things as possible, or as many opportunities as possible for them on campus? Why are we not instead focusing on lowering the boundary between campus and the rest of the world, right? Why is our attention not focused on those things? Why don't we spend more time doing those things? Okay. So I think that if we re-examine our own priorities a little bit, we will find that maybe our own effort as institutions is misdirected. And what happens when students are getting all the opportunities on campus is that they feel that they have to take them all, because if they don't take them all and other students take those opportunities or their batchmates take those opportunities, then they won't have those things on their CV. And in the process, it becomes a copycat system of, like, cookie cutter. You have a cookie cutter army that is just put out on the market, and nobody knows what they're good at. Nobody has invested that time in self-discovery because they've just been busy doing everything their people around them have been doing for fear of not losing out in the competition, right? So I think that these are some of the tensions that I certainly would want us to think more clearly about.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kalyani, because I really appreciate you putting another side of the story that otherwise we don't focus on. Professor Muthamizhchelvan, I have another question for you, because particularly we've seen, what are the kind of systematic changes that you would suggest in the ecosystem so that governments and academia can focus on bridging the employability gaps, thereby enhancing the talent pool and taking the right measures, in fact, right from the school level to the professional level, by focusing on the employability skills, and as we discussed a little earlier, also imparting lifelong learning skills?
I think the quality and relevance of education and training is critical to preparing youth for the workforce. Quality in education, there are multiple assessments being conducted, and the OBE is now a critical metric for the survival of the higher education student. Outcome-based education, which reflects the quality in education. Relevance could be achieved only by the industry collaboration. As an academician, it's very difficult for us to bring in the relevance. I think we can bring it to a certain extent, but not to the satisfaction of the industrial people. So internships, apprenticeship is paving the way for relevance and readiness. When compared to about 7-8 years ago, every student wants to go for an internship. That's the change that we see. So that's a good sign. Influence of the governing bodies in the curriculum development and policies is to take a reform. Now we have people from the industry and from the other thing, but government bodies should also be considered. It has to be thought loud and strong on the reforms to be made in the period of study of various academic programs, with clear understanding on the adoption and impact of MOOCs, mode of learning, and skill development courses blended with interning with industry to make a big impact in the talent development and management of our youth. Now, Professor Kalyani was mentioning about when more and more students want to be away from the campus, why we need to have a lot of facilities. I think when somebody wants to take up a course by staying away from the campus, the education is not complete. People can study from anywhere, but unless they're in the campus, they will not have an opportunity to learn the life skills. So I'm not saying that they should be totally away, there should be some mix of these two. That's what I was trying to mention. Then the other thing is enabling a robust ecosystem for entrepreneurship and startups. Professor Kalyani gave a different meaning to entrepreneurship now. Will be the right move to create more jobs, and in the meantime, decreasing the job seekers. So this idea is very well embraced by the government, and the policies or programs are taking its reach to impact. So it's very clear that these reforms are linked to each other and needs a parallel action. So if we consider these things, and then probably the issues can be, the challenges between the transition from the school to workforce can be narrowed.
All right. Thank you, Professor Muthamizhchelvan, for that response. I have a specific question for Dr. Agar. Given that you're the director of, the international programs at the Peking University, and in fact, my colleague, Professor Kalyani, is also was some time ago heading the internationalization programs at Jindal Global University. In your opinion, do you think to what extent does internationalization and exposure of students to both short-term and, probably pathway programs enhance their employability in the job market? Does it really impart them with some interesting assortment of skills that, makes them even much more prepared and more adaptable to the job market? What is your take on that?
I like that you asked me this question in the context of as the director of international programs, because I will say, speaking as a lawyer, I think the answer is it depends. And I think we all have a tendency where if we have a hammer, we look for nails. And I'd love to be able to tell you that, I think always 100% of the time getting international experience is the best thing to broaden your mind and, better equip yourself to go into the workforce. I don't know that that's actually the case, right? If you're someone going into certain industries, maybe finding something in your local community that you hadn't seen before might do twice as much for you than going off to France for a semester. I think it is great for human development to see other parts of the world. I had my first experience when I was 18 of moving halfway around the world to Egypt. It unquestionably changed my life and put me on sort of the path that I ended up on. But if my goal had been to become a local judge in my small town in America, actually, if anything, this experience would have almost like tainted my resume, right? I would have been almost like damaged goods that I had instead gone overseas rather than staying in my local community. So while I am a big proponent of seeing the world and getting international experience, I don't necessarily think that all jobs benefit from it or that all people, it's sort of what they need to do. And of course, the reality now, as we're seeing with inflation and, travel becoming more complicated, is I think promoting something like international travel, et cetera, or studying abroad or doing a degree in another country, it can be a message that is really a burden for a lot of students if they don't have the means to do that or don't have the opportunity to do that. And if we're then promoting that message up to employers potentially, I think there's a question of like, who are you leaving behind if you tout that as being unquestionably good?
Yeah, that's I partly concur with you. They're both downsides. There's a flip side of, as much as how much can a student benefit, from international programs. At the same time, a lot of students do come back with, enriched experiences after they've been on short-term programs as well as pathway programs abroad. Kalyani, I just wanted to reach out because you've also been briefly for a few years at the helm affairs, leading the international office at Jindal Global University. What has been your take and experience and your observation in this respect? Does it really make at least some kind of minimal change or change in perspective of students who get opportunities or able to make the cut to be granted these opportunities to study in pathway programs and other short-term abroad programs?
Yeah, I think it depends on how flexible you are. Many students still choose to stay abroad precisely with the intention of migrating long-term. So that is a completely different scenario, but with the right amount of, again, flexibility and with a view to the long term, yes, especially in the kind of network it allows you to build. And in many, for example, Paul was talking about law in the US, and as he was speaking, I was just thinking like, this is exactly why it's so hard to internationalize like legal education in particular. But just in terms of sometimes getting a glimpse into how certain skill sets can be used, or a certain qualification, even, or a certain type of training can apply to a wide range of sectors, right? Is, I think, can be quite an eye-opening experience. Now, within all of this, there's a broader dynamic of, or overlaying all of this, there's a dynamic of crises, right? Like many of the traditional markets are in deep crisis.
Yeah.
I returned to India with a UK post-study work permit stamped on my passport many years ago, like literally a week after I got my work permit, thanks to the 2008 crisis.
Yeah.
Right. This has recently happened to so many graduating cohorts, who, during the pandemic. So I think this is a discussion we can potentially have on many levels, and and that certainly very few people in the internationalization space are now kind of making these really black and white assertions.
Dr. Kalyani, we just have one question which we have our audience, member, Mr. Ashish Malik, has wants you to answer. He wants you to shed briefly a quick response on what is the significance of developing a personal brand as a student in order to be able to make yourself better employable.
Yes. It is important. It is important, but I think that as a student, it is first and foremost, especially as an undergrad, it is important to understand what you like and what brings you joy and what keeps you motivated in the long run, right? And the brand building can happen much later. Like the brand building, I'll tell you when the brand building happens. The brand building happens when you're updating your CV to apply for a job and writing a cover letter. That's when you kind of formulate your brand. So don't worry about your brand. Okay, be as all over the place as you want to be or feel like being right now. And worry about your brand when you decide to like apply for a job or show up for an interview. Okay, that would be my short answer.
All right, thank you so much. We've pretty much reached the end of this session, and before we close this session in a couple of minutes, I'd like to get a quick response from all of you. Before we conclude the session, if each of you could respond to what would be the one mantra or advice you would give your students to to guide them to sufficiently skill themselves and prepare themselves for the job market. I'd like to begin with Professor Muthamizhchelvan.
I have a 3C framework: competence, commitment, and compatibility.
Fantastic. Dr. Agar, one mantra from your end.
I would say balance. I would say finding the balance between skills building and at the same time introspection, balance between specializing very narrowly, but also remaining kind of flexible and able to change your career, reevaluate, whether you're enjoying your job or not. And that I think applies to all things, right? Balance in studying like crazy to pass the exam, but also getting outside to go on a run and keep your mental health up. And, if you can keep that, if you can train that as a student in order to keep that with you through your career, I think most of us benefit.
That's absolutely correct. Kalyani, what
I would say two things, okay? Yeah. The things that you did unintentionally just for fun are the things that will pay off at some point, right? So do those things that you just do because you want to do them right now. And the second thing I will do is don't be exclusively self-focused. Take an interest in what others are doing, support what others are doing in whatever way you can. Create opportunities for others, because that's how all of the opportunities will come back to you, and they will be there for you, and things will show up for you when you need it.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree with all of you. And, we need to really gear our students to understand it's not just a one-time juncture where you get a job, but you need to prepare yourself in so many multiple ways and find that fine balance between your professional career as well as other aspects which are equally important in life. With that, we come to a close of this session, and it has been indeed an insightful session, having all of you come in and share your experiences, given your diverse backgrounds, and why we will be continuing to have these conversations on some of these issues in our classrooms, at our universities, and at various forums. But I really want to thank you, Professor Muthamizhchelvan, Professor Agar, and Professor Kalyani, for your valuable insights. And thank you to all of you joining us, and we hope you will tune in to our other remaining sessions for the day. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you.